I am not a crook. I am not a crook.
I'm also not Richard Nixon. This is Mr. Swanson. If you've seen us in the room for the whole year long, this is Richard Nixon. And, well, Richard Nixon is our topic of the day. I am not in class today, so I'm bringing you a video class. I'm going to do it as rapidly as I can. You have notes in front of you. You have notes and slides posted to Google Classroom. So, I'm at Army National Guard drill, doing the best I can to bring you a robust education while also being a member of the Georgia Army National Guard. So with no further ado, Richard Nixon, 37th President of the United States, let's go. So here's how I want you to start. I want you to take a moment, even if you need to pause this video, my substitute or a battle buddy in class, if you need to pause this video, go ahead and do that so that the students can write their own letter of resignation. I want you to write a letter of resignation. If you had to resign the office of the president, how would you do so? Start with a blank sheet of paper, just like Richard Nixon did, blank sheet of paper. What would you say to the country? Would you say anything to your family? Would you say anything to justify your actions? Would you just say, I'm sorry? What would you say to resign the presidency of the United States? So go ahead and pause if you need to. Write it on a blank sheet of paper. Share with your shoulder partner. Share with your front-back partner. Talk about it up at the front of the class, and then you can resume this video. So go ahead and get to that now. Pause. Unpause. All right. So be sure to include your signature. I'm sure that you had some interesting thoughts, and I will talk to my battle buddy about how that shook out. I'm excited to see what you came up with. As a reminder, here we are, presidents of the Cold War era, presidents of the modern era. I hope you're tired of talking about these two slides at this point because you've got them memorized. You see the president's wall to my left, your right. You know which presidents are Cold War presidents. You know which presidents are modern era presidents. That's good. Got more content to come about all of them, so let's get to it. Richard Nixon. So what is he known for? First of all, he's known for the 1960 presidential debate. We actually talked about this yesterday in light of John F. Kennedy. It was a televised debate. We have television as a new medium for communication. Richard Nixon is a judge to have lost this debate, as we talked about yesterday. He had the 5 o'clock shadow, looked a little scraggly, compared to muy guapo, good-looking John F. Kennedy. So Richard Nixon, known for the 1960 presidential debate. He is elected president in 1968. We've talked about 1968 a lot so far. 1968, a very landmark year in U.S. history. He wins this election. However, it's largely due to the absence of the assassinated Robert F. Kennedy, who likely would have won the election otherwise. Nixon, known for the Watergate Scandal. He is in office during the moon landing. He did not set the goal to land on the moon, but he is the president who reaps the benefit of Neil Armstrong walking on the moon. Watergate Scandal, the War Powers Act, the end of the United States and Vietnam, the EPA, that's the Environmental Protection Agency, and diplomatic relations in China. These are all things we're about to talk about, so let's get to it. This is a representation of the 1960 televised presidential debates. We see a very good-looking, handsome, and charming John F. Kennedy, and a little bit more tired, haggard, 5 o'clock shadow Richard Nixon, something we already looked at yesterday, hopefully just a bit of review for you. This is his first foray into presidential elections, 1968. We will see him again, however, in 1968. Loses in 60, wins in 68. So let's talk about the election in 1968. One of the most chaotic elections in American history. President Johnson, he vacates the Democrat Party nomination because he's tired. He's war weary. Showed you that picture where he's rubbing his forehead. He had big crease marks in his forehead. He's tired. He probably would have won the election. He certainly would have won the party's nomination. He probably would have won the election, but he is tired. He does not want to run for re-election. He does this only 9 months before the actual election. So that is not much time for the Democrats to rally, come up with a new candidate. This leaves Nixon and RFK, Robert F. Kennedy, as the top two contenders in the election. Let's talk a little bit more about RFK. RFK is probably leading the polls. He is leading the polls. He is likely to win the presidency, but for he's assassinated. Kennedys have obviously a long line of tragedy in their family. His brother, John, is assassinated. That is President Kennedy, assassinated in 1963. And Robert is assassinated on the campaign trail in 1968. Here's actually two pictures of him when he was assassinated. He was assassinated by a man named Sirhan Sirhan. Yes, that is the same word twice. And Sirhan Sirhan assassinates him for some political motivations. This happens on June 6th of 1968. That is 4 months before the election. So leading candidate for president is assassinated 4 months before the presidency. That does not leave the Democrat Party much time to rally, come up with a new candidate. And as you may be able to guess, they did not win the next election. They did not win the election with their filling candidate. What we've seen here is Kennedy. He was actually shaking hands with the kitchen staff in the basement of the hotel that he had just been campaigning in. And this young boy here, he was literally shaking hands with Kennedy as the assassin, Sirhan, comes up to Kennedy, fires right into his abdomen area. He falls. He's not dead immediately. You can see from the pictures, he is alert, he is alive, but he perishes from his wounds. So pretty traumatic event for those who are near it. Some up close and personal killing is never a good thing. RFK dies in June of 1968, 4 months before the election. He's replaced on the ticket by Hubert Humphrey. And like I said, Humphrey just did not have a chance. Nixon wins the presidency by an electoral count of 301 to 191. So Humphrey, he earned 191 electoral votes, but that is not enough to win the election. Nixon wins the election. He becomes the 37th president of the United States. 1969, the moon landing, something we talked about in light of the Cold War. We remember the Cold War as a period of tensions between the USA, USSR, expressed through competition, and the space race was one of those competitions. NASA is founded because of it, all of that significant information. Well, the 1969 moon landing fulfills President Kennedy's pledge to land a man on the moon by the end of the decade. That decade is the 1960s. July 20th, 1969, kind of almost running out on the decade, would do it. It is a symbolic victory of the space race amidst the Cold War tensions. Yay for us, we win. We are the first on the moon. And most notably, we put it on television. We talked about how the Soviets, they actually racked up a lot of points on the scoreboard. Perhaps they were winning the space race by the number of achievements. So we were the first to land on the moon. We put it on television to prove that we did it. Bada bing, bada boom, we win the space race. I want to point this out. Nixon was actually prepared for failure in the mission. It'd be a hard thing for the president to have to tell the world that an astronaut was lost in space. We sent these men to the moon, but we're not able to get them home. I want you to take a look at the speech he had prepared in the event of failure. It's a very humble statement. He accepts responsibility for the loss, and he kind of talks about accomplishment, scientific achievement for the greater good, even with the risks involved. So take a second to read that speech. The speech was never delivered, right? We did not fail. We brought our astronauts back home, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. So this speech did not have to be delivered. Of note, talked about this several times across our semester, that television show Timeless about time travel. They go back in time to the moment of July 20th, 1969, when man walks on the moon. They actually run into one of the characters who's in that movie called Hidden Figures, one of the African-American lady who's responsible for math and coding. So that's kind of a collision with history. And in the story, not in real life, but in the story, man does not land on the moon. Man is not able to successfully return home. And in that story, the TV show called Timeless, Richard Nixon actually delivers this speech. So it's really cool how in-depth that TV show goes with history. They even use this speech that was only prepared for the event of a failed space mission. That is not what happened. This also reminds me of how President Eisenhower had a speech ready for a failed D-Day invasion. He was ready to take responsibility for that failure. However, it was not a failure, it was a success. So very interesting to see all the examples of leadership we've seen throughout the semester. Let's talk about the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. This is actually a government organization that was established under President Nixon. Its aim is to monitor the environment and pollution emitted by industrial facilities. It enforces laws passed by Congress to protect the environment. EPA was created on December 2nd, 1970 by President Nixon, and it was in response to the variety of confusing, jumbled, often, they didn't connect with each other. They weren't consistent with each other, state-level environmental protection laws. So Nixon creates the EPA to federalize environmental protection. So instead of states having their own laws for what to do with water, what to do with pollution, how to do clean air, state-level laws, nope. Now it's a federal agency. It's a part of the executive branch, and that means President Nixon is in charge of enacting laws related to the environment. Motivation for the EPA was a publication of a book called Silent Spring. Author is Rachel Carson. The main idea of Silent Spring, which was written in 1962, so kind of had a while to get its message out and catch some grassroots energy throughout the country. Main idea was that pesticides were harming the environment and wildlife, and particularly the birds. It's this classic environmental book. Silent Spring was an environmental science book written by Rachel Carson, published in September of 1962, documenting the adverse environmental conditions caused by indiscriminate use of pesticides. So she does not like chemicals being sprayed on plants. The wider issue, however, is pollution at large in our air, in our water. What do we do to protect the earth that we have? So the Environmental Protection Agency becomes an independent executive agency of the United States federal government tasked with environmental protection matters. President Richard Nixon proposed the EPA in July of 1970, and it begins operation in December of 1970. So that's a pretty quick turnaround. Good job for government work, just about a five-month turnaround after Nixon signed it into law via executive order. Massive support for environmentalism brought on by the publication of Silent Spring and the development of Earth Day led to the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency. Did you know it's literally Earth Day today? April 22nd, Friday today, while you're watching this video, is Earth Day. The more you know. So go out and do something good for the earth today. EPA leads to the passage of the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the Endangered Species Act. So arguably all good measures. We want to breathe clean air. We want to drink clean water. Of course, we don't want any animals to go extinct. This is what the EPA is largely responsible for. Overall, long-term effect, EPA leads to a reduction in pollution levels. Overall impact in the long term is that the EPA leads to a reduction in pollution levels. EPA was the executive branch agency responsible for monitoring the environment, pollutants emitted by industrial facilities, and enforcing the laws passed by Congress to protect the environment. This is the EPA. Let's talk about the Nixons in China. Might surprise you that Nixon deals with China because aren't they communist? Yes, they are. Let's find out more. 1972, as the Vietnam War is winding down, or we know that it's winding down now, President Nixon takes steps to reestablish a relationship with China by visiting China for talks and negotiations. Reason he does this is because he wants to end the war in Vietnam. He campaigned on that. We talked about how the United States is kind of losing reputation on the world stage due to the lengthy, extended conflict in Vietnam. So Nixon wants to end the fighting in Vietnam. He wanted to normalize relations with China. February of 1972, Nixon, his family, his advisors visit China in a very well-publicized trip. They visit the Great Wall. They take a lot of photographs. They're not doing this in secret. They're definitely doing it in public. They want it to make the news. It does make the news. It makes the covers of magazines, all that kind of stuff. Nixon's efforts result in a return to business with China, and China withdraws its support from North Vietnam. So think about how many things are made in China today. Obviously, they're shipped over to our country. This visit, Nixon's visit to China, results in all what we know today, a bunch of products being made in China. And then most importantly, at the time, China is no longer an ally to the North Vietnamese, no longer supporting the North Vietnamese cause with troops, equipment, no longer helping Ho Chi Minh. They withdraw their support from North Vietnam. That is a major blow to the effort of the war in the North, and it's going to lead to peace accords, eventual peace in Vietnam. Now, of course, we know eventually North Vietnamese do take back over South Vietnam. Today, there's just one Vietnam, and it is communist. But it is the beginning of the end of U.S. involvement in Vietnam. Let's talk about that, the end of the U.S. involvement in Vietnam. 1973, Nixon seeks to establish or reestablish positive relationships with world leaders as the president. He ends the war in Vietnam due to this goal and pressure from anti-war protests. So he's getting it internationally. He's getting it domestically. Nothing good is happening due to the Vietnam War at this time. It's time to end the war. Here we have it. The newspaper headline says, ceasefire, all GIs will be out of Vietnam in 60 days. Is the war over? Well, was it even a war? Is it over? Kind of have ourselves a similar situation as we had in Korea as well. War Powers Act, a little bit of a side extra that comes out of the Nixon administration. The War Powers Act limits the president's ability to send troops overseas. This is the opposite of the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which gave the president too much power. The War Powers Act limits the president's power. It requires Congress to authorize troop commitments for a certain time frame. If you remember the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, it had an open-ended expiration date. It was literally blank. Well, this is the opposite of that. This requires that if the president's using troops, it must be for a certain time frame, or Congress, when they authorize the use of troops, they authorize it for a certain time frame. No more just leaving that page blank. All right, let's talk about the Watergate scandal. This will be Nixon's lasting legacy. For all the good he did, Watergate is what he gets remembered for. President Nixon actually resigns the presidency over accusations of illegal activity, such as spying on his opponent and covering it up. The spying, maybe the public could have tolerated, but the lying and the covering it up, that was a blow to moral character. That was a blow to the trust vested in the president. And that is what really got Nixon in trouble. It was the lying and covering it up. Don't miss that. Don't miss that in your life. Lying and covering it up, you lose trust. Friends, family, or in the president's case, the whole country. He lost trust from the country. Leads to widespread mistrust of the entire government, and this does become Nixon's legacy. Take a look at Nixon's letter of resignation. Just like you started the class with a letter of resignation, Nixon's letter of resignation is short and sweet. August 9th, 1974, Dear Mr. Secretary, I hereby resign the office of the President of the United States. Sincerely, Richard Nixon. 9 words. 9 words on a sheet of paper. Sheet of paper used to be blank, could have become anything, but it becomes President Nixon's resignation letter, and in 9 words, he resigns the presidency of the United States. This is his televised address to the nation. Therefore, I shall resign the presidency. It's a lengthier speech than that, but he was short and simple. He just resigned the presidency in just a very few amount of words. Here's a little bit more about the Watergate scandal. How did we get to the point of the president resigning? Let's find out. Nixon was reelected to a second term as president in 1972. So he's elected in 68. He's reelected in 72. He could have been a 2-term president, 8 years. Well, over the course of the next few years, information began to slowly come to light that illegal activity was happening at the highest levels of government, all the way up to the president himself. And it started with the Nixon re-election campaign. Nixon re-election campaign took some illegal campaign contributions. It's always about that money from some corporations who had in turn sought special favors from the president. Basically bribery. We'll contribute to your campaign if, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, you're going to help us out while you're the president. An even bigger scandal emerges when evidence comes out that Richard Nixon authorized, or at least he knew about. Okay, it gets fuzzy as to whether he was directly involved or at a minimum, he did know about it. And we know about this because of certain audio tape recordings. So he at least knew about a burglary that happened at the offices of the Democratic National Headquarters at the Washington, D.C. Watergate complex. When we say Watergate, it really comes from the name of the building. Watergate is an office and apartment building. So the Watergate scandal is just simply referring to the burglary that happened at the Watergate complex. What it was the Democrat National Headquarters, and there were Republicans who broke into those headquarters trying to find out some Democratic campaign strategies and also to leave listening devices, eavesdropping equipment in the office. The Nixon White House tried to cover up its involvement and obstructed the congressional investigation. It's that obstruction of justice that really turned it into a crime worth impeaching and removal. So the sad part of it all is Nixon did not need any of that information for re-election. He was reelected by a landslide. I can't remember the electoral count, but trust me, it was a landslide. He did not need any of that secret information. He didn't need to tap the DNC headquarters to get more information. He won the election and he won re-election in a landslide. So on the back half of things, it's really sad that he cheated to do so and lied about it because he didn't even need to do that in the first place. Nixon, that's that slide that's been right there. So this has basically been a domestic issue amidst many international issues at the time. He's dealing with things in Vietnam. He's dealing with things in China. Well, this is an at-home issue. The abuse of power exposed during the investigation led to a significant mistrust of the government by the American public. Media and journalists are credited with doing a good job. They're credited with being watchdogs and holding politicians accountable for their actions. So most of this information came out of investigative journalism, scooping up the dirt. I want to say dirt like it's a bad thing. They really found the facts in this case. And guess what? Nobody's above the law, not even the president. So this information comes out. It's publicized. President has broken the law. The president has committed some crimes. He's going to be held accountable. So the media and journalists, especially the journalists who were doing the digging here, are credited with being doing a good job, being a watchdog organization, holding politicians accountable for their actions. In the end, Nixon resigns because he believes that Congress would have impeached him and removed him from office for covering up illegal activities and obstructing justice. They would have, he would have been impeached. he would have been removed by the Senate. He would have been the first president removed from office. So instead of going through that process, he says that he's going to save the country the heartache of going through that process. He resigns. He is the only president to have resigned. To this day, he's the only man to have resigned the United States presidency. This is Nixon leaving the White House. He gives the double peace signs, which this is actually V for victory. I know we say peace, but this is V for victory. He pieces out on the White House South Lawn, and he leaves public life at this time. He is replaced by his vice president, Gerald Ford. Not related to the Ford Motor Company, but I think that that's the best way you're going to remember it if you connect that with Ford, Gerald Ford. He is the vice president. He becomes the president. We'll talk about Gerald Ford a little bit more tomorrow. The ongoing issues surrounding the Watergate scandal maintain their hold on the government and their country at this time. It's one of the big overarching issues that Ford is dealing with as a young president. Well, he doesn't want to be overshadowed by the issues. He doesn't want the country to be bogged down by these issues. So rather than continue to drag on the criminal portion of Watergate, he pardons President Nixon, former President Nixon, of any federal criminal wrongdoing. See, Nixon still could have been charged with a crime. He still could have gone through a trial. Just because he resigned the presidency doesn't mean he was off scot-free. At this time, though, President Ford decides to pardon him, and that absolves him of his crimes at that time. Anything that he may have been being investigated for, the investigations were going to stop, and he was going to not be going through that process anymore. So despite the harsh criticism, a lot of people think that Ford didn't do the right thing. Despite the harsh criticism, Ford believed that it was time to put the national nightmare, Freddy Krueger style national nightmare, behind the country and focus on the issues at hand moving forward. What is a pardon? I kind of want to explain that real quick. Well, we say this phrase a lot. Pardon me, well, means excuse me. Pardon my French. If you say a bad word, that means excuse me for saying a bad word. You might say pardon my mess. If I walk into, you walk into my house and the kids have made a mess, I'm going to say pardon the mess. Pardon is the action of forgiving or being forgiven for an error or offense. So in terms of the president giving a pardon for a crime, that just means slate is wiped clean. You're not going to be investigated for that crime or charged with that crime anymore. Ford says he did it for the benefit of the country. Let's move on from this national nightmare. Today, this phrasing is still in use a lot. Watergate has become Deflategate, related to Tom Brady and his deflated footballs, or Spygate, also related to the New England Patriots and the accusations that they use video cameras to spy on their opponents. A lot of times, gate is slapped onto the back of a word, and it is referencing Watergate. Anytime there's a scandal of any sort and that word gate is attached to it, it becomes referencing Richard Nixon's Watergate scandal. So there you have it. That is Richard Nixon in a nutshell. And with that said, I will suck it to me. Sign off.